Welcome everyone to the School Garden Leadership Training. This is the second session of our spring series. This one is titled One Plant Plus Two Plant Equals Propagation. We're excited to have you all here today, and my name is Tiffany Torres. I am the State School Garden Specialist with Florida Agriculture in the classroom, and I'll be helping facilitate today. We have some great speakers and facilitators with us today who are going to help us learn more about propagation, which is really, I think, a fascinating topic that can be applied both in the classroom and in the garden setting to enhance your farm to school programming. So let's get started. And as you're coming in, part of the goal with this training series is that we want everyone to stay connected and get to know one another. So please go ahead and type your name into the chat box, as well as your organization or school that you may be affiliated with, and whatever county you're tuning in from today, and then maybe one plant that you want to grow more of. And we're excited to let you all talk freely using the chat function. You can chat individually with people you might know and get to know one another that way. And note that you can also rename yourself in Zoom by clicking the three dots next to your video box if you want to say, where you're from there, and please include your pronoun preferences as able as well. And while you're getting to know each other in the chat box, I just want to go over some quick Zoom housekeeping tips. So we will be hosting presentations as well as live demonstrations during this webinar today. Viewing modes can be found in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. So the best way to view presentations when I'm sharing my screen is to enable side-by-side speaker view specifically, and you can toggle left and right to make the speaker in the screen bigger or smaller. And then the best way to view live demonstrations is to use speaker view only. So you may need to press the escape button to exit full screen to view some of those options. And at any point, you can also click the participants button at the bottom of your screen to see all attendees and to view other controls. We'll be using the chat feature throughout the webinar, including for our Q&A session. So please note that you can post to the full group or send a message directly to any participant. And most of all, please be sure to mute your video and audio so that it is not in our recording and so that we can hear our speakers fully. And closed captioning will be available on our YouTube recording. So before we dive into content, I wanted to take a moment to ground us in what this webinar series is all about and who the experts are that are here to help you along the way. So this webinar series is brought to you by Florida Agriculture in the Classroom and the University of Florida IFAS Extension Family Nutrition Program. All webinars will be recorded for future viewing, and CEUs are available upon request as well. And just a note to mark your calendars if you haven't already. We have an Eventbrite page with all of our upcoming webinars on it. The next one will be on March 16th, Splashing Around Hydroponics from Beginning to End. And today we're going to talk mostly about propagation. We originally had listed that we were going to talk about cutting, layering, grafting, and very specific types of asexual propagation. But we will mostly be focusing on cuttings today. So you'll see shortly, if you haven't already, that there is a poll that we have. We're curious to see what other topics you might want to see in the future covered. So if you could go ahead and fill out that poll. We have grafting for fruit trees, tissue culture, air layering, and seed saving as options that we could pursue in the future as there's interest. And I'll just give one more moment for everyone to chime in there. All right. Looks like most people have started to answer, and seed saving is a huge interest, followed by grafting, air layering, and then tissue culture. So thank you for giving that feedback. We can go ahead and close out the poll. All right. So thank you for that feedback, and I'm going to tell us a little bit more about why we're here today, what we're here to learn. So this webinar series was designed for Florida school garden leaders of all levels to build gardening confidence, foster collaboration among leaders, and strengthen garden programs for long-term success. So we do this by incorporating 3 core elements into each of our sessions: gardening knowledge and skills, curriculum connections, and community organizing strategies. And part of that community organizing really is creating an environment for all of you to learn from one another, because it's not just the experts that have something to share. We want to hear from you all as well. So please be sure to check out our Facebook group, where you can post things that you're doing in your school gardens across the state and chat with others in your field. And a little bit more about Florida Agriculture in the Classroom. As a host, we are funded through the Ag Tag Specialty License Plate. We offer a variety of educational resources that are free on our website. This includes school garden curriculum, activity newspapers, agricultural themed lessons, and more. And we are also offer farm to school programming, such as Agricultural Literacy Day, our virtual farm field trips, workshops and trainings, both in person and virtual, and school garden consultation. And then lastly, we also offer grants and awards throughout the year. So teacher grants are open again in August. Our school garden grants, I want to do a quick plug, they close on February 26th. So if there's a project that you are interested in getting funded, please apply now. And we also offer volunteer grants that are due on March 12th, along with our Excellence in Teaching Act Award. And you can see all of our contact information for Becky Spoonholtz, Jennifer Morgenthal, and myself there on the right. So please reach out to us at any time if we can better serve you. And our second partner is the University of Florida IFAS Extension Family Nutrition Program. FMP provides SNAP education in Florida across 40 different counties and has been providing that free nutrition education since 1996. FMP helps limited resource families in Florida access more nutritious food choices on a budget and adopt healthier eating and physical activity habits to reduce the risk of obesity and chronic disease. So now that you know a little bit about who is hosting the webinar, I want to introduce our speakers today. We have with us Travis Mitchell from UF-IFAS FNP as a food system specialist, Melissa Hall with Echo International, who is their propagation manager. And Melissa is here to answer questions at the Q&A at the end of this, and also made a pre-recorded video for this webinar. We have Caitlin Gladding, who's going to do a live demonstration with us, and she's with Grow Your Soul Gardens. And then the 3 of us from Florida Agriculture in the Classroom, Jennifer Morgenthal, Becky Spoonholtz, and myself, Tiffany Torres. And just a quick overview of what we'll be walking you through today. So we're going to start with why teach propagation, a little bit of that curriculum background there, and then move into a presentation on intro to propagation, and specifically sexual propagation through seed saving, or not seed saving, just seeds. And then we'll move into the specifics of asexual propagation around cuttings with that pre-recorded video from Melissa, and then flow into a live demonstration on how to start and sustain sweet potatoes with Caitlin. And we'll close it all up through a Mythbusters polling activity that we're going to do together, trying to give you some best practices for starting a windowsill garden in your classroom. And we will close it all out with our Q&A session. So with that, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the Q&A. Feel free to put questions into the chat. We won't stop for questions during the presentation, but we will try to answer as many questions from the chat box as possible, and then we'll get back to them at the end of the session for that 30-minute Q&A answer period. So I'm going to hand it over now to Jennifer, who's going to talk to us about why to use propagation as a teaching tool.
Hello, everyone. I'm hoping that everyone can hear me loud and clear. I am Jennifer Morgenthal, the education specialist with Florida Agriculture in the Classroom. So I am kind of the person that comes up with some new resources, new curriculum, always thinking of new ways that you guys can bring ag into your everyday lessons. So I am very, very familiar with standards. So I want to go over why we use propagation as a teaching tool. So just in general, it meets different science standards. I can share a couple of those specifics when we get to that point. It's applicable to many grade levels. You can use this from 3rd grade all the way up to high school seniors. And it's used to teach a wide variety of topics, to life skills, to standards that we teach and the kids need to know. And then also food access. It can give students the ability to have food access that they normally wouldn't have, especially in different areas throughout the state. Sometimes up in the panhandle, they're not able to grow things that are grown down in the South. So it's kind of a cool way to spread that wealth among students all across the state. Next slide, please. So propagation as a teaching tool, some of the educational topics that are covered, plant growth and kind of the factors that affect that growth, from water to light to climate and those types of things. Definitely that 3rd to 5th grade, age group, they talk about life science. They're also talking about how plants respond to different stimuli, classification of flowering and non-flowering plants, such as those that produce seeds, those that don't, different types of reproduction, getting energy from the sun, those types of things. So that all can be covered amongst this using propagation. Plants versus animal needs, we do compare that in that same age group. And that is something that is discussed a lot in middle and high school when they're getting into biology and more into life sciences and those types of things. What does a plant need versus what do we need as humans as well? Reproduction in plants versus animals. I know in that elementary age, it's kind of a intro into reproduction, but obviously when they get into the middle high school ages, they do a much deeper dive. So sexual versus asexual reproduction this is a great opportunity to teach that and show that in the classroom. And then lastly, financial literacy. I push this a lot because I think it's something that's a missed teaching opportunity. But when you only have a certain budget and you're wanting to have a large garden, this is a way to take one plant and turn it into mini plants. So this is an awesome budgeting tool, and also the economics of having large scale production agriculture, or small local farms, how they can survive and compete in the ag industry. And then applied skills, things like how to conduct research, science experimenting, following instructions, because that's important. And there are many instructions to follow when you're propagating plants. Self-sufficiency and resiliency. Teaching kids to garden in general teaches that as a life skill. And it's one that they will take with them wherever they go. So responsibility for another living thing. We find that kids love to show up to class if there's something there that needs them, something they have to tend to. And you can definitely have that with propagation. And then empathy, once they know what it takes to grow something else, it helps them empathize with living things, and also helps them get a peek into the ag industry and understand what, maybe those farmers and growers are going through in order to provide food for us. So those are just some of the things. There are obviously English and math opportunities in almost anything you teach. So that, of course, is there as well. And if you would like more specifics, definitely feel free to reach out to me and we can dive into what you can utilize propagation for in your classroom. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Travis. He's going to get us started on the overview of propagation and how to start seeds.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. So hey, y'all, how are we doing today? I'm just going to go over some real basics here. And apologies, there's going to be repetitive things in these slides, but I think they'll still get a good gist of it and get y'all started. So the first thing I want to note before we get going is it is 105 days till June 1st. So I know for Gainesville here, spring has sprung. And this is often a time when a lot of people get excited about gardens. But just to keep, not to like dull expectations, but keep that in the back of your mind as you get excited about stuff as this presentation goes on, that some of this, depending on how it works out, might be something you want to wait till next year, depending on what your school schedule is. So just keep that timeline in the back of your head as we move forward. So first, getting into kind of the two big ways that we propagate / grow most of our fruits and vegetables, right, are going to be through seed or cutting. So almost all of our vegetables are grown through seeds, right? And seeds, we almost all know, are germinated when we put them in the right conditions, i.e. warm, wet soil for most of them. And then cuttings are when we are growing that plant from a part of that plant. So they're generally asexual clones, the exact same thing that came before. Potatoes and sweet potatoes are both grown using cutting techniques. And a classic example of some of the challenges or potentials of issues with that cloning is the potato famine, right? Where all those potatoes were the same kind of potato being grown in Ireland. And once they got that disease, it wiped them all out. Next slide. So kind of jumping into what most these slides that I'm doing are going to be on is focusing on that seed propagation, because we got some great videos and live stuff later that focuses on the cuttings. So seeds are going to need the right conditions to germinate, right? So for most of our vegetable seeds, that just means the right combination of light and temperature and moisture. But some seeds need to be scratched and some seeds need to sit in cold. So it's just important to know, if you're working with different plants, what conditions they might need to make them wake up or germinate. It's going to take anywhere between 1 to maybe carrots might be 3 weeks from when you put them in the ground to when they sprout. After that 3 weeks or 21 days, unfortunately, it probably means that your plants, your seeds didn't make it. But you just want to give them some time, because there can be some variables and some can be a little slow to wake up. Next slide. So just a couple things on seed sourcing. So I know this year I've already seen is like with a lot of stuff, still extra crazy with sourcing. And some seed companies are restricting. So just heads up, you might run into that if you're out there looking for seeds online. But that online source can be a great resource. The best resource I recommend people, if you have them, is your local garden store, your local nursery, something like that. Feed and Seeds are a fantastic resource if you have an agricultural business like that in your community. If you're really fortunate, there might be a seed library or seed and bake program or different seed saving operations. Next slide. So I just want to note a few things on the seed packet. If you get this kind of traditional seed packet that you'll see sold at, say, a garden store or a big box store, it's going to have a lot of information for you on that. I mentioned at the beginning that 101 days. One reason I mentioned that is because a lot of our crops for days to harvest are going to be 90, 80 to 120 days. So just keeping that in mind, if you're planning on doing a garden to kind of harvest activity, that your timeline might be tight. The seed packs are going to give you that information. They're going to give you stuff like disease resistance and all sorts of other good information. So always read that seed packet. It'll tell you a lot on planting depth and all sorts of stuff. Next slide. So once you got your seeds, just a note too, they don't last forever and they need to be stored properly. There's stories out there that are able to germinate seeds in the Arctic that are 30,000 years old. So seeds have an amazing ability to stay alive, but they also need the right conditions. So preferably want to keep them indoors, away from humidity, in like a sealed container. The next slide is a chart that I believe we have, I'm sure we have in the Google Drive. It's a UF-IFAS document that lists some of the average recommended times depending on the variety. And this is on ideal conditions. So I know some of us might be wanting to really hold on to those seeds for a long time, but you really want to get them in the ground, get them planted, because they are a living being that needs to do their thing. So next slide. So we're really getting down to the details now. All right, you've got your seeds, we've sourced them, we've got to figure it out. We need to get them started, right? So first thing, again, just don't guess anything. If you don't have that seed packet in terms of depth or stuff like that, check with someone, contact your local IFAS extension, contact a local nursery, find someone else or online that provides you that information. Really important to get right from the beginning to have success. You want to make sure in some sort of protected area. The photo here we see inside. That's great if you have enough light. So you see in the photo, they've got a grow light. It can be really difficult to get enough light just from a windowsill. And in that light can lead what people will call leggy, right? These seedlings kind of reaching up. You can see them almost trying to reach up for light. So next slide. And grow lights are a really getting affordable way to be able to do that indoor. So again, some of the repeat things here. But yeah, you want to have it somewhere where it's easy to monitor and water. They're very delicate at that stage of life, seedlings. If they dry out, and they can quite quickly, depending on conditions, they're going to die quite quickly. And vice versa, if they get flooded, they could also die quite quickly. And just a note on soil mix, there are specially marketed soil mixes for propagation. They're generally much finer and not going to have any fertilizer pre-mixed in. Kind of counting on the seeds first germinate, they're going to have fertilizer from the seed, and then you're going to need to do some sort of liquid feeding, like a little Miracle Grow mix or something like that as they get older. Next slide. So just a few more notes here and comments on starting your own seeds. So you do go down that road. You want to make sure you do what they call hardening off, which is even if they're outside in a greenhouse, that plastic is still kind of diluting the light a lot different than if they were just out in the full sun. And definitely if they're indoors, we need to ease them into those full sun conditions. So you want to kind of find a kind of shady or partly shady area near the garden where you can have those plants kind of hang out before they make it out to your full sun growing area. And also if you're timing them, you want to kind of get it just right in that growth where in those cells, they have expanded out to where they hold the soil. But ideally not so much like you see in the photo on the bottom right, where they're starting to go around in circles. But if they do become like that, no big deal. You just want to make sure when you plant them, you kind of loosen up those roots a little bit. Sometimes the plants aren't smart enough to get out of that kind of circular growth pattern. Next slide. And then just a few notes on, hey, we did all that, nothing came up. It happens sometimes. It could have just been you had bad seeds. It could have been that they sat in your trunk for a week and got too hot. There's just a variety of conditions, and sometimes it just happens. Also, it's possible if they're outside, you may have insects or birds. You want to look to see if you see something digging. There's definitely different things that can cause you problems. But hopefully some of that got you right on the right start, and I'll pass that along to our next section.
Thank you, Travis, for that informative presentation. So now that you learned a little bit about the basics of propagation and sexual propagation through seed starting, we're going to transition into watching a pre-recorded video made especially for this webinar by Melissa Hall from Echo International. She's going to share with us asexual propagation techniques and simple ideas for cuttings that you can start in your classroom or garden setting. And the video is about 10 minutes long. Please take a moment again to make sure your audio and video are muted so you don't appear in the recording of the webinar. I'll share the video from my screen, and we'll also provide a link to the video in case you'd like to view the video again in the future. And again, Melissa was kind enough to join us live today, so if you have any questions while watching the video, please type them into the chat box, and she'll either answer them now or during our Q&A session at the end of the webinar, and we'll keep track of those. So I'm going to go ahead and get that video started for us.
Hi everybody, I'm Melissa Hall. I'm the propagation manager here at Echo in North Fort Myers, and today we're going to talk about vegetative propagation, but specifically taking cuttings. But really quick, a couple of other types of vegetative propagation are air layering, propagating by division, and grafting and budding. This is a society garlic plant right here that we would propagate by division, which means we would just divide this plant in half. The goal of vegetative propagation is to create multiple plants from the same plant material. So you're just propagating those genetics, the genetics that you like, to multiple plants. Similarly, grafting is propagating this top portion. So you can see there is a union here. And this is what happens with most of our fruit trees, oranges, apples, stuff like that. This is a sapodilla. And we are getting this piece from a already fruiting mature tree that we know and we like its flavor. We like when it bears, and so we're propagating it vegetatively in that way. So now moving on to cuttings. Before you take your cuttings, you need to think about a few different things. The first one is what type of media you're going to use. Sometimes you can just root cuttings in water. And this is a really nice and easy way to propagate cuttings. Not everything roots well in water, but if you can find the things that do root well, this is African tree basil, and it is a great one that roots in water. There is also, you can also use just a simple peat-based potting mix, which if you're starting a garden, you probably have access to this. We've found that it works just fine rather than getting a perlite and vermiculite mix. So you can propagate it, or you can take cuttings and put them in here. On the other hand, you can also use a coarser potting mix if you have easy to root things that are already going into large pots. So this is a cassava, has a really thick stem, so we know it's going to root and do well. So another thing you need to think about is the variety of the cutting that you're going to take, or what type of plant you're taking it from in general. But specifically, if you're trying to keep varieties separate, this is an important thing to consider. So behind me, we have 8 or 9 different varieties of sweet potatoes, and we keep them all separate in their own trays because they all have different characteristics, and we want to keep those genetic characteristics separate. So knowing your variety and where your plant came from, and also making sure it's a vigorous plant and it's disease-free and pest-free as well. So something like this is an Okinawa spinach. It's a great ground cover, and it's a perennial green. You can eat these leaves. They're really tasty. They taste like spinach. And this would be like a good type of propagation material. So that's before you're taking your cuttings, some of the things you might need to consider. And now we'll talk a little bit about when you're actually going to take your cuttings and a few different types of cuttings. First of all, we have hardwood cuttings, which over here we can see there's a tray of mulberry. And these hardwood cuttings primarily go dormant in the winter. One theme that you're going to see throughout this whole cutting process is the thoughtfulness about the buds and nodes. So you can see here on our mulberry cuttings, there is a bud on the top, and right below or right above where we took or where we cut the base, there is also a bud. And that's because at nodes, and specifically where there are buds, that is where the plant hormone auxins are concentrated. So, and that's going to be where adventitious roots are forming. So we have hardwood cuttings, and again, these are ones that go dormant during the winter. We also have semi-hardwood cuttings, and we kind of consider our chaya semi-hardwood cuttings. And you can see also there's nodes at the top, and that's purposeful. You can see that's where the new leaves are pushing. And these, for most semi-hardwood cuttings, you actually want to leave leaves on and cut them in half. But for these we do not, because they are such thick stems, they don't need it. And additionally, so we have a bud at the bottom and a bud at the top, or a node at the bottom, and that's going to help it root out. Thirdly, we have, we kind of group softwood and herbaceous cuttings together. And this is what we'll be getting another sweet potato cutting demonstration. But how we do it here is we want at least 3 nodes, and that's the general rule of thumb for all of these things. For some things you need less, for some things you would want more, or more is better. But I might cut it here, just at the base, and come at the top. So I might get 6 inches, and then I'm actually going to cut off all but the top leaf, and then cut that in half. And this is how, so again, we have a bud at the bottom, a bud at the top. And this is how we've propagated all of these. And if you're going to plant your sweet potato slips, we actually recommend rooting them out in water first before planting them in the ground, rather than having them in potting mix and then planting them in the ground. They seem to just do a little bit better. So this would be considered an herbaceous cutting. And another thing to really make sure of for actually most cuttings is we don't want the really young, tender tips. This is too fragile of material. And so I would maybe take one more cutting here and then be done with that, not even use that piece. Some other herbaceous things that you can take cuttings of are things like tropical oregano. So if I was to take a cutting of this, I might cut right below this node, and then these leaves I might just cut in half. And tropical oregano is super easy to root, but that's something that you can just put right in the soil. And so we're just counting on those buds below the soil. Okinawa spinach, this one is another one that's just like that as well. So the cuttings look very similar. You're cutting here, cutting off all the leaves and chopping them off at the top. Another fun one that is really easy to take cuttings of is prickly pear. And this is a really easy thing to propagate. Cut it off from the plant and then you can let it cure for a couple of days. So just let this wound heal and then you can plant it in the ground. So now moving on to some of the aftercare and healing processes. This is where a lot of your issues will actually end up happening. So in general, when your cuttings are healing, you want a warm, humid environment. You want the environment that your plant wants to grow in normally. So if it's cold, like it's been for us here, we have to use things like heat mats. So you'll see there's heat mats below some of our cuttings. These are K-tuck cuttings here. Also another great perennial green that you should include in your school garden. So you want a warm and humid environment. So that our poly propagator over here also helps create a little bit more humidity. There's the heat mat below, and there's actually a pool of water at the base, and that is radiating up and creating this humid environment. And that's going to help your cuttings heal even more. You don't want too much humidity so that they start molding, but particularly we know passion fruit really appreciates extra humidity, and that's what we're just looking at. A low-tech option for that is something like a plastic bag over the top of your cuttings. This is a Grafton here, but we make these little humidity tents all the time, and this is a really great option, but then you have to make sure that you're bottom watering that plant. So yeah, humidity and warmth, and also some access to light, but you don't want direct sunlight. So in a shadier area is usually better. In our greenhouse, we have 50% shade, which makes it a great place for propagating plants as well. Other than that, I think some other really great plants that you might want to propagate, especially on your windowsill or something like that, especially in a jar, are things like perennial peanut, which is a ground cover. Purple mistflower is another native that you can propagate by cuttings, as well as blue porterweed is a great one that is easy to root out in water as well. Other than that, I will hopefully be around for the chat portion later, so if you guys have any other questions, feel free to ask, but thanks for listening.
All right, so I hope you all expand a little bit more on what Melissa shared with us about starting sweet potatoes. And this is with Caitlin Gladding from Grow Your Soul Gardens, and she's going to share with us some specific ways to start sweet potatoes from the actual tuber and not just the cutting like Melissa shared. So just a reminder, as we move into this portion, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and if you want to go ahead and get into speaker view so that you can see Caitlin's demonstration enlarged, that would be the best viewing option. So, thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Tiffany. Again, my name is Caitlin Gladding, and I have a small business here in Orlando where I help community members and residents start vegetable gardens. But previously, I worked with a lot of these folks on the ag in the classroom side and FNP, so I'm happy to be back and talking sweet potatoes with you guys today. So I want to start out by talking about why sweet potatoes are a great crop for us in Florida. Specifically, we grow them over summer when there's multiple other challenges that we're up against. So the first being that you guys as teachers are primarily not on campus. So, you know, having a high maintenance crop that you have to take care of every day is really out of the question. And also sweet potatoes are pretty much low maintenance. You can kind of plant them before you leave and let the environment of summer do its thing, and they'll survive throughout this season. But also in summer, we have what's summer rains, and summer rains produce a lot of weeds and growth, plant growth. So instead of coming back to your garden covered in 4 feet tall weeds, sweet potatoes kind of act like a live mulch. They vine out across your garden beds and really suppress weed growth. So when you come back in the fall, you just have a beautiful green, lush garden bed and way less weeds than you would if you had kind of just left it empty. Sweet potatoes are produced through what is called slips, not seeds. They're not through seeds like most plants. They actually produce these small slips. And I'm going to show you guys a couple of different ways that you can produce slips on your own. The first way that you can do it is through cuttings. So if you have a sweet potato like the guest speaker just showed us, if you already have a sweet potato vine, you can take cuttings from that vine and root it yourself. You can rewatch that video of how to do that. The second best option would be to actually purchase sweet potato slips from your local feed store or online through any seed dealers. There are certain varieties that grow like better in Florida, and I'll share those with you guys later. But instead of just whatever variety they have at the store, you can find a variety that works a little bit better for your region. But lastly, you can grow them through starting your own slips, and it's super easy. It is a multi-step process, and it does take quite a bit of time. But if you're a school teacher and you are low on funds, this is a very easy way to grow your own without having to fork out money to go buy a bunch of slips online. The cool benefits of starting them your own are that you really get to teach the entire life cycle of the plant. So you're showing the kids your students the end product, and then how the end product produces the slip that goes through the entire life cycle. Again, like I mentioned, it's cheaper and you can do it on your own timeline. This right now is really important because of the pandemic, a lot of feed stores and seed stores online are very low on stock. Some aren't even selling to home growers anymore. So this really kind of gives you the independence to do it on your own timeline to assure that you'll have slips to plant for summer. And the timeline for growing these, I think, which will be shared as well in the notes, is that they go in the garden as soon as you take out your warm season crop. So you plant these at the end of the school year after you've harvested everything in your garden. They grow all summer long, and then you harvest them when you come back to school in the fall. All right, so today we're going to be talking about 3 different growing methods. I'm going to show you guys some different examples. The first one is the water method. This is probably the one that you're most familiar with through Pinterest and Facebook and all those other ways, but you will start with a jar of water. I just have a largemouth mason jar here, and let's see if I can show you guys. Let's see here. And then you're going to grab 3 toothpicks. So this is going to be similar if you've ever started like avocado seed. You're going to do this quite similarly. And what you want to identify is the top and the bottom. So this is really important. All of the slips grow out of the top part of the plant and the roots come out of the bottom. So it's really important in the water method that you identify which way is up. The way that you can identify it is this is where the sweet potato was snapped off of the root. And so there's like a little nub there. This means that this is the top, and this kind of flat, large round area, this is the bottom. I have 2 different examples here. So if you can kind of see, those are the bottoms. You can also, this one also has a little root growing out of it. This shows us it's the bottom. So now that we know it's the top, you will just take 3 toothpicks, put them about 1/4 to a half away up the sweet potato vine. Let's see here. And then you'll place the bottom into your glass of water. So it should be about halfway in. Hope everyone can see. Halfway in and halfway out. This glass will then go into like a windowsill, and within about a month or so, the slips should start growing out the top of the plant. This again is great for visual for the kids. It may not be the most effective way to start slips, but this is a really great way for kids to see the entire process. Alrighty, the next way, is my camera angle okay? Can someone give me a thumbs up? Or I just want to make sure everyone can see what I'm doing. Okay, cool. All right. I have a little mini garden here inside with me. The next way is to actually start the sweet potatoes just in your garden. And this method is a little bit easier. You are going to take your sweet potato and you're just going to lay it horizontally in your soil. It will be about halfway in, halfway out. And you want to keep your soil damp, like moist, but not soaking wet. And again, for a period of a couple of weeks, then the sweet potato slips will start growing out at the top and rooting on the bottom. This is a little bit easier, low maintenance, and from anecdotally, from what I've heard, you have higher likelihood of having a more productive sweet potato. Every sweet potato you grow should produce like 10 to 15 slips. So this is just another method that you could do just like that. Let's see here. And then the last method kind of combines the two. So here I have a sweet potato that I started a while ago. So you can kind of see the slips that are starting to grow. This one has about 4 on them, and this is actually a leaf that's coming in. So once this gets to be about 6 inches tall and has 2 or 3 significant leaves on the slip, you actually would break off the slip. So they snap right off very easily. And then you would root these slips either in water, similar to the water method, or root them in the soil. So you can't just take a slip, like once your potato starts producing slips, you can't just take off the slip and plant it in the ground. Like the presenter before me mentioned, it's really best practice to root the slip. So if you're rooting in water, it doesn't actually take that much time. This slip is about 2 to 3 weeks old, and it has 2 to 3 inch roots on it. And this is really all you're looking for when you want to plant it in the ground. So this would be ready to go into your garden. You wouldn't want to wait much longer than this. It will weaken the slip. So timing is important here. But this is about what you are looking for. It's about 6 to 8 inches with a 2 to 3 inch root on it. The other option is if you have pots. I see Peter mentioned that he has a ton of pots. You would need one like this that's about 6 inches wide, maybe 8 inches wide. Fill it to the top with your soil. And then you would take your sweet potato that has a slip on it. You would cut it in half and place the top part on the soil. So you, and the way that you tell when it's ready to go into the soil is when the bottom also has roots out of it. So if there's slips coming out the top and roots coming out the bottom, that's a good sign that this is ready to be transplanted. You would then take off the bottom part, discard the bottom part, and just plant the top part in your soil. That will again give you higher, more robust slips that you could take off and plant into your garden. So those are the 3 different methods. I know it's a bit confusing, but we have notes that I'm happy to share with you guys after the kind of detail all the different methods. And then Tiffany, if you can pull up my slides. I just have some more. Oh yes, Melissa. Looks like Melissa shared some varieties and so did Travis. Those are varieties. So if you're buying your own slips and not starting them, I don't think you can identify what varieties of sweet potatoes they have at Publix or the grocery store. So thank you. All right, so once you've created slips and you've rooted your slips, then they're ready to go into the garden. Spacing for slips and sweet potatoes is about 12 to 18 inches apart. So if you have a standard 4x8 garden bed, then you would need about 8 slips per bed. So here's 2 different examples of kind of what that spacing would look like. The photo on the right is probably a 4x6, and the graph on the bottom left is a 4x8. Those slips are probably a few weeks old. That on the right, I would imagine that would be once you've put the slips in the ground. After a few weeks, they start to grow more leaves. Next. And they will live in your garden all summer long, just surviving off of rainwater and whatever love anyone on campus can provide to them over summer. But typically they're fairly low maintenance summer crop. So when you come back to school in the fall, the way that you can tell that the sweet potatoes are ready to harvest is when the leaves start turning yellow. So in contrast to white potatoes, which sweet potatoes are totally different, grow very differently, different season. The sweet potatoes, you'll just start to notice some yellowing of the leaves, and that is an indicator that you can start harvesting your crops. The way to harvest is you actually have to be quite delicate, because sweet potatoes, when they're freshly harvested or still growing, are quite, well, they're not as strong, they're more fragile than they are than the ones that we buy in the grocery store. So you would essentially dig about an 18-inch hole around the root of your plant. You can use a hard tool, but at that point, I really like to just kind of use my hands and pull up the pile of sweet potatoes and try and just sift through all of the potatoes with my fingers, because it's really, really easy to break them, and you'd want to avoid damaging the roots as much as possible. So, you can use some heavy tools to get in there or afterwards, but for the most part, you really want to be gentle and delicate with removing the sweet potatoes from the ground. Next. And the last step, which I think a lot of people don't realize, is that sweet potatoes need to be cured. So after you harvest sweet potatoes, it's not necessarily recommended to eat them fresh out of the ground. They need to go through a process called curing. This process helps make them sweeter, so it improves their flavor, and then it increases their storage life. So after sweet potatoes have been cured, they can actually store on your shelf for like 6 months. I'm sure we all have some sweet potatoes on our counter that have been around for quite a long time. And this process can be done in a lot of different ways, but pretty much you just kind of want to lay them out, as this photo shows here, in a dark, high humid place, preferably not outdoors. I would prefer it to be over cover, or if you have a little greenhouse on campus. And if the temperature is about 80 to 85 degrees, they only need to be cured for 10 days. And if it's 65 to 75 degrees, then they need to cure for about 2 or 3 weeks. So after that, the sweetness is really locked in. They develop this hard outer skin that we're more familiar with, and they really are going to be good to go at that point in time. In the past with teachers, I'll just share one more quick thing. In the past with teachers who may not have the resources like these fancy curing bins or greenhouses, I've just used like brown paper bags from the grocery store and put 5 or 6 in there, roll them up, store them underneath the desk or underneath the counter for a couple of weeks, and that usually does the trick just fine. Okay, next. Yes, so the last thing I want to make sure we address or identify is the sweet potato weevil. This is the absolute #1 most damaging pest to sweet potatoes. And unfortunately, how you identify it is also through the yellowing of the vine. So if you make a trip to your garden in the middle of summer and sweet potatoes are turning yellow beforehand, it may be a sign of sweet potato weevils. They lay their eggs, the larva, and the root, right at the root or the stem of the crop. And when the larva hatches, they actually eat the roots and the sweet potatoes from the inside out, leaving their waste in the potato. Fully grown, they look like I'm sorry, this is so blurry, by the way, everyone. I'm not sure what happened here. But on the bottom right, you can see an image of the full grown sweet potato weevil. They have a large like black bottom and a red top, but the identifier is that they have a large, like a long black like mouthpiece. I'm not sure what the scientific word is for that, but so if you see these in your garden, they can easily be mistaken for fire ants or something. Make sure you start doing some identifiers. There's not a lot of easy ways to treat sweet potato weevils. If anyone has encountered sweet potato weevils before or treated them, I would love to have your feedback in the comment section. But at this point, the best thing you can do is just to keep a lookout for them and avoid as much as you can. Next. Yes, so lastly, just those varieties. So these are the UF IFAS recommended varieties for Florida, the Centennial and the Beauregard. And those who have like small gardens or container gardens, the Vardman variety doesn't overtake everything as much as others. So yep, I think that's all. Wonderful.
Great. Thank you, Caitlin.
And I'll be on at the end for the Q&A as well if anyone has any follow-up questions.
Thanks. Really appreciate it. Yeah, I see there was some chat in the box about the different varieties growing in Fort Myers. And so definitely take care to look into that if you're going to try this in your own classroom. But we wanted to take a moment to share a successful case study with you all of one example of a garden with a goal that had to do with sweet potatoes specifically. So this is a story from Carr Elementary School in Calhoun County, Florida, up here in the Panhandle. And this is from 2018. We worked closely with Carr to determine what plant they wanted to grow with the goal of actually having everyone in the school, it's a very small school, be able to try something from the school garden. So we built these raised beds and decided on sweet potatoes because of the seasonality. So in February, we started our sweet potato slips in the classrooms. In March through April, the slips were grown in the classroom and propagated efficiently, as Caitlin demonstrated there. And then in May, we got together and planted the sweet potato slips in the garden, and a lot of different classes came out to help with that. And you can see on the left there an example of what it looked like with the slips just getting started. And then on the right, how they started to fill out the bed the further along we went into summer. And as Caitlin mentioned, sweet potatoes are awesome for school gardens in the summer because it is a really low maintenance crop and you have something to come back to in August when the students are back in session. So when they did come back in August, we planned a harvest day. And you can see there a couple of cute pictures of a lot of students harvesting these sweet potatoes together as a class. And we did that with a couple different classes. And then in September, we set them aside to cure. And then in October, as was the plan all along, we initiated a taste test in the school cafeteria in celebration of National Farm to School Month and the Florida Crunch. And we also invited a guest visit from a farmer from New North Florida Cooperative. You can see him kind of standing in the background here on the left. And we also partnered with Florida Department of Agriculture and their chef on staff, Chef Paula Kendrick, and she came. And students were able to taste on the cafeteria lunch line some of those sweet potatoes that were grown in the school garden as French fries, sweet potato fries. And then we also had samples of sweet potato smoothies. And you can even see there's a little smoothie bike here. So we had students take turn and, tried to tie that to physical activity as well. And then in the upper right, we did some evaluation and monitoring of how well received this was. And you can see that most of the students, everyone tried it and most of them loved it. So that was just a really fun example of, thinking ahead, as Travis mentioned earlier. There's only so many days in the school season. until we're gone for summer. So thinking ahead of what we can do during the time that we have together to really enrich our farm to school programming at the school level or the classroom level. And you can see a lot of happy faces here in the middle that enjoyed this project. So with that, we're gonna transition into our Mythbusters Propagation Edition polling activity, and Becky Swanholtz is gonna introduce this for us now.
Hi, thank you. To build, can you see me and hear me? Okay. To build on what Tiffany covered, we want to talk about what is your goal. We're going to talk to you for a few minutes on why you would use Pinterest for garden ideas. Are you using it online to show students plant growth, or are you just trying to get cute ideas for your classroom, or are you really wanting to grow a viable garden? So it's really important to understand why you're doing these projects so that your expected outcomes are realistic. I can tell you, I'm definitely one of those ones that has spent a lot of time on Pinterest and had a lot of Pinterest fails. So there are definitely some pros and cons to using websites like Pinterest, and we're going to go over a few. But before we start, we're going to launch a poll. So if you guys could take a few seconds and tell me if you have used Pinterest for creative ideas in the past. Wow. There's a lot more no's than I was expecting.
Yeah, I'm surprised as well.
Okay. So for those, I'm going to end that one. For those few that have done it, I want to know how many of you nailed it, didn't nail it, or somewhat nailed it. I know there's only 4 of us, so we have to be honest. Okay. All right, so I'm going to end that. Is it still on your screen? Okay, next slide. Okay, so we're going to start talking about some of the ideas that we have done in the past and where they are good and where they're bad. I'm going to start with K-Cups. My first experience with K-Cups was when quarantine happened and I had a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old at home with me. And I had a bunch of K-Cups. And I thought, oh, this is brilliant. I have these. I don't have a place to start my seeds. First thing that I had trouble with was when I opened them, if you can see that picture that's in the top right corner, there was a lot of mold. If you do not process your K-Cups right away, they grow mold. So I had to throw away most of mine because I didn't know what kind of mold it was growing. So number one, if you're going to use them, make sure you clean them out first. Number two, you can see my adorable children right there. They're really small. So depending on what you want to grow, you're not going to be able to get them very big before you have to take them out. I was lucky enough to have a space in my house where it got really good sun, and every day my kids were able to spray them with water bottles. If you don't have that ability, you see how I put them in a tray right there. You can put a little bit of water on the bottom every day, but you cannot put these just outside for the rain because you will flood these out. So K-Cups have a place. But I will be honest that most of those plants did not successfully make it into the garden because they just didn't get big enough before they outgrew and they got leggy, like Travis was saying earlier. So you really definitely have to experiment with which ones are good and which ones aren't. The peas, I did some English peas in there. They definitely grew too big, too fast. But my slower growing ones, we did some tomatillos. Those were a little bit better, but definitely pros and cons. I have had a lot better experience just buying the trays from the store. When I was teaching, we had an area where we wanted it to be really cute. And if you heard me say the word cute, I am emphasizing that. It had no real purpose other than that. And we decided we wanted to make a mason jar garden. We learned a lot of things. First is there's no drainage, and we knew that going in. But we live in Florida and there's a lot of rain. So our jars ended up flooding, and along comes rain, then comes heat. And so then we kind of boiled our roots. So in order to be successful with a mason jar, you really need to give drainage holes. A regular drill bit does not work on a mason jar. You will shatter it. But a great thing to do with a mason jar, if you see that center picture, you can use net cups and create a self-watering system. So if you really want to create a really great window garden that is using a mason jar, make sure that there is some place for the water to go away from the roots. So if you have a big jar, like it looks like is in that center picture, you can put some rocks on the bottom, but a lot of plants will actually outgrow these planters pretty big. So you definitely need to know what you're doing. Are you trying to just grow some simple little things and start seeds in your windowsill? Or are you really wanting to transplant these out into a garden? So it just really depends on what you're trying to do. And again, it goes back to that, why are you doing it? So if you're wanting something really nice in the windowsill, mason jars are great. And I have not tried the hydroponic unit, but that is definitely on my to-do. All right, Tiffany, go ahead.
Yeah, so continuing on with vessels that may or may not be good. Maybe you saw them online and they were cute, but they might not work out so well in person. Eggshells is one of those that is deceivingly cute, but maybe not the most productive. So it's a great teaching tool for composting. It reduces waste in some ways, but there's definitely some concerns around foodborne illnesses. So properly cleaning them, if you were going to try this method in your windowsill garden, is very important. And then it doesn't decompose quick enough for the roots to be established. So unlike the pictures that you see to the left, our cardboard egg cartons are going to break down much quicker than those eggshells are and allow those roots to get established wherever we're transplanting it. So the other advantageous thing about egg cartons that are cardboard, not styrofoam, is that they can be cut into little individual pieces, plots basically. And those can be used on individual desks. Say if you're studying plants in a classroom setting and you want each student to have their own plant to be able to identify leaves or something of that nature, parts of the plant, they're really great in that way. And they also will decompose eventually. So you can just simply wet it before you are about to plant it in the ground or in a bigger container to make sure that you're loosening that material, and then go ahead and plant it. If you are going to try transplanting, taking it out of the container wouldn't be the best option. We might disturb the roots too much. But overall, it's worth trying, and it's a fun, easy thing to repurpose in your classroom. So give egg cartons a shot. And then moving on into recommended rescues. We see this picture online a lot of, I've even gotten some Instagram ads, trying to sell me books that will allow us to regrow our entire dinner that we ate last night into a new meal. So again, it's a question of what is your purpose? Are you teaching about propagation in your classroom setting? This might be really great for that. But if you're trying to actually produce something to consume, repurposing your food scraps might not be the best way to go. So we have a couple of different examples, and we broke them into some simple solutions, caution, and some ones that might need additional maintenance. So scallions, green onions, and chives are excellent and very easy to grow in the classroom setting. So you can see here scallions that I started about 10 or 12 days ago, only about 3 inches tall. And then that's about a couple days in, and the picture on the right here is about 12 days later, and I have them here in person. It looks almost like something that I would buy at the grocery store, like I never even harvested it once. So the key thing here is that you want to make sure to change your water. I do it once a day. You could do it every other day. And the same goes for celery and romaine, which you can see here, and Becky has those in person as well. Both of those require you to change the water regularly. If you don't, something like what happens here on the right of this celery plant could happen, which it's rotting away. So really you just need to cover to the bottom of it, and then it'll keep growing the leaves out the top. So the key thing here is adjusting your expectations of what you're growing, especially things like carrots that we see. You're never going to be able to regrow the root part of the carrot, but you could regrow the greens if you want to repurpose those into a salad or something like that. So again, do your research, and we recommend these simple ones to start: bok choy, carrot greens, leeks, fennel, basil, types of lettuces. And then ones that might require a little more maintenance but are still worth exploring from an educational standpoint are the avocado. I feel like most people have tried to start an avocado pit in their life at some point. You can see here, there's the toothpick method that Caitlin mentioned, and then eventually you can up pot your plant into a bigger pot. Just a word of the wise, if you get an avocado, a Haas avocado, for example, from the store, it's very, very, very unlikely that you're ever going to get that avocado tree or plant to produce additional fruit. So there's a lot more that goes into it there. And if you're interested in learning more about that, please get with us after the webinar. We have some resident experts on staff. Pineapple as well, you can cut the top off and start to root those in water. The key thing here is that it takes a very long time to grow a pineapple. So if you start this with your third graders, they might be in probably fifth grade by the time they actually see a pineapple. So it is a fun teaching tool and possible, but again, adjusting your expectations. And then additional maintenance category, we have potatoes, sweet potatoes and russet potatoes alike, white potatoes. Just require a little additional steps, but it is still worth doing in your classroom. So I hope you learned some things from our Mythbusters episode. We certainly want you to walk away feeling more confident with the ability to grow your classroom and windowsill garden. And just a few other words as we wrap up here today and head into our Q&A session. We hope that you learned that there are two types of propagation. There's sexual propagation through seeds and asexual propagations through practices like cuttings, grafting, layering, etc. We saw that a lot of you are interested in seed saving, so maybe we'll do a webinar on that in the future. And propagation is really a great teaching tool for science, math, art, and so many other standards, as Jen mentioned. So don't be afraid to try things and get messy in your classroom. Sweet potatoes are one really easy thing to do on your own, and hopefully you feel a little more confident with engaging in that activity. And again, it's a really simple thing to come back to after summer and maybe harvest a few things in August when school is back in session. And lastly, don't believe everything you see on the internet. Some scraps are better than others for regrowing, as I just mentioned. And if you want more resources on any of this, we are going to post a link to the Google Drive for any of the participants. And we'll also upload a recording of this webinar afterwards. And we're happy to follow up with you by email or phone as well. So with that, we thank you for attending, and thank you to all of our speakers. We're going to head into our Q&A session if you are able to attend, and Becky will go ahead and moderate that portion as well.
All right, so the first question that I saw was what kind of sweet potato I can grow, and Travis and Melissa definitely got some good information into the chat box, but in case you guys missed it, Travis said the Centennial and the Beauregard are two varieties that grow well in Florida. If you don't have as much space, the Vardaman, it's a bush type of sweet potato that's great. Melissa said in Fort Myers, they grow quite a few that I'm going to mess up the names. So check back on the chat so that I don't mess those up. Tiffany, there was a question when you were presenting your case study. There was some black piping, it looked like, on the edge of the boxes. Is that irrigation?
That was irrigation, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a drip irrigation similar to what we spoke about in the last webinar.
And is drip irrigation needed, or is there enough rain in Florida
Yeah, we had that irrigation installed prior to the sweet potato planting. So you could use additional irrigation, but there's a lot of rain in the summer for sure.
And that leads me to my question. I am a sweet potato fanatic, so I'm really excited about this. Is there such things as too much rain? In North Florida last year, we got a lot of rain. Do these rot with too much water?
I'm going to defer to Melissa if you have any feedback on that, but I have seen some mold pop up, so it might be a consideration. And we have some people in the chat saying yes.
Sure. Yeah. Can you hear me at all?
Yes.
I can, yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that definitely different fungi can start growing if there's too much rain. It's important to plant it in a place that is well draining. That's but with our sandy soils down here, at least, we don't have too much of a problem. If there starts to be flooding nearby, then like in between rows and stuff like that, that's when you could start to see like some sweet potatoes rotting as well. And one other consideration also is to, when you plant it, don't plant it with a lot of nitrogen. So you want it to be well draining, and they actually grow very well with little nitrogen. So and if you put too much nitrogen down, it can focus more on the greens rather than the tubers. So that's another important consideration.
Mm-hmm.
Melissa, I think here's another question for you, or somebody else if you know. Can you propagate herbs like cilantro and mint?
Yes, you definitely can. I've never tried propagating cilantro by cuttings. Cilantro prolifically seeds though, so that's an easy one to save those seeds. And I don't know if anyone has any experience propagating cilantro by cuttings or anything like that, but mint is another one you can most definitely propagate by cuttings. It can grow like a weed at times. So if you take a cutting and you can root it out in water, or you can just put it directly in soil, and it usually will, if it's given adequate moisture, it usually will just keep growing.
Yeah, and in the slide where we had the mason jar with the kind of single hydroponic system going with the net, that was actually a chocolate mint plant growing there. So they grow well in those systems as well. And then they don't spread to the rest of your garden. Mint is a prolific spreader, so you always want to make sure to contain it early on.
Caitlin, when I was watching your presentation and you said that once the sweet potato starts growing roots and then the slip grows from the top, if you want to put it straight in dirt, you cut the roots off and you don't plant that part. Is that correct?
So you if you're doing that method, you actually cut the sweet potato in half. So you would just cut the potato in half, plant the top half in soil, and discard the bottom half of the whole half of the sweet potato.
So like the roots and everything.
Yes.
Huh.
And that's the water method, is that correct?
Yes. It's the water/soil method.
If I could add to, sweet potatoes, in my experience, are just a really hardy, vigorous, want to grow plant. And yet you can just throw them on the ground. They'll sprout in your, in your basket on your counter. So there's a lot of different ways to go. The important part is to get those slips up and get them cut out and replanted. But you'll be surprised how well the sweet potato will survive and take abuse.
Mm-hmm. And we did want to mention too, I think Caitlin might have mentioned this, but you tear the sweet potato slips off. You don't cut them off the potato. That's an important distinction.
That is all the questions that we had in the chat. But if anybody else has questions, please let us know.
I typed too slowly, so I'll do this. I had a question on the different methods with the sweet potatoes. So you said in the beginning that the slips come from the top and the roots from the bottom, but then one of the methods was to put it horizontally. So does it then just naturally, will the roots will go ahead and reach to the nutrients in the dirt, and will the slips come just from one end?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
So in that way, you don't have to be as worried. The potato will naturally know what's going on, and it will do its thing without you having to place it upright. So yes, all the slips will always grow from the top. The roots will always grow from the bottom. And if it's placed in soil, it will automatically identify which comes from which.
Considering we're just restarting our garden, we have to pull all the weeds and everything. I'm so excited about the idea. Not many weeds over the summer. So
that's one of my favorite parts about this too. And, I think a couple years ago when we started getting those bad hurricanes in September, this kind of buys you a little bit of time when you come back to school in the fall. You don't, you're not pressed to get the garden going at the same time that the kids are getting acclimated. You can really kind of let the garden do its thing, harvest when you're ready, or, harvest after hurricane season, or it's just kind of can sit in there and do its thing until you're ready to get it out, which is great. And there's no harm.
now, we're running a couple weeks later. Can we start it later? I know on that you had the timeline, they planted them in May. Can we start a little bit later, or will it be too hot?
So I think what I read on the EDIS document is that you can plant them as late as June, but I would definitely get them in the ground before you guys leave for the summer holiday. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, they're really hardy. The only thing I tell school, if you can, just try to get them in, a month before school ends, so you can get them established. If you don't have irrigation, and they normally could survive just with rain, unless there's a really rough drought. But they definitely need regular watering to get them established and get those roots out there.
Yeah, that's where the irrigation can be really helpful in the beginning. I did want to also share a story from Tallahassee School of Math and Science here in Tallahassee. They had a great sweet potato crop one year, and then realized at the end the weevils had gotten to all of them. And they were also planning to a whole taste test in the cafeteria, all these things. And so it was a big disappointment, but then they turned that disappointment into a learning opportunity about the sweet potato weevil itself. Caitlin showed a picture there, and it really didn't do the bug justice. They're like the cutest bugs that I've seen. You can get little magnifying glasses and put them in there, and that's what their class ended up doing, and looking at the bugs close up. But what's cool about them too is their only defense mechanism is that they pretend to be dead. So if you tap on the little magnifying glass container that they're in, it'll kind of send them into an alert mode, and then they just automatically fall over and they look like they're asleep for about 2 minutes. And the kids had so much fun, even just counting how long they would stay asleep for. So again, turn your gardening opportunity into a learning opportunity, even if there's difficulty.
It's crazy.
Something else I forgot to mention, I don't know, Travis, maybe you could pop in and share. Travis shared a great analogy with us to talk about how sweet potatoes grow and a great way to think about sweet potato propagation. Are you still on, Travis? Well, I can share. Basically, the example is that if you think of the sweet potatoes as a fuel tank, is that right, Tiffany?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So if you think of the sweet potato as a fuel tank, if you have a whole sweet potato, let me see, all mine are wet or dirty now, but if you have this whole sweet potato, this fuel tank is full. So the slips are not going to produce more sweet potatoes. But the whole purpose, all sweet potatoes want to do is create more fuel tanks and fill their fuel tanks more. So when you take off the slips and you plant those, its whole goal is to fill the tank and create the fuel tank. And so that's why these propagation method works.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Caitlin and Travis. We have a few more minutes if there's any other questions out there.
Okay, so I really am new to all of this with it. You said earlier about purchasing slips. Do you have suggestions, or will you be sending information as to where? I don't even know where to start to look for that, other than I can look for anything online, but.
Sure. What county are you in, Lori?
Lee County.
Lee County. So if there's any Lee County folks on here, I think there are. If you have any local places that you've purchased slips from locally, please drop those in the chat. If not, if you just Google any online seed stores, there's like Johnny's, Baker Creek Seeds, there's a lot of like large ones. They sell slips online, but if you can buy them locally, they're likely to be a variety that's better for your region.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Kelly can help. It sounds like Kelly's going to help you find a good spot.
And I want to also point out that Melissa said another way to deter sweet potato weevils is to not have sweet potatoes in the ground during their reproductive cycle, which is from August to November. So that's a really helpful hint there. And then we had a question, do the sweet potato leaves taste good? I don't know about that one. Does anybody else?
They do.
Any
I've just
hints
eaten
as
the
to how you harvested and had them?
So
Yeah.
the dandelion greens, but they're bitter. Are they bitter or sweet?
I have questions about the sweet potato vine preparation. So it's been a long time since I've eaten them, but I think we prepared them in a curry. So it wasn't like I didn't make a pesto genie, and it wasn't like the sweet potato leaves were the most prominent thing, but it was like a dark leafy green that you add to a soup or to a curry. So those flavors overtook it more than the sweet potato leaf itself.
Yeah, it'd be neat to see what the nutritional content is there for the sweet potato leaves themselves. All right, well, it is exactly 5 o'clock Eastern time, so we're going to go ahead and wind down here, but thank you again for everybody joining us today, and especially to our presenters and speakers and facilitators. We really appreciate you being a part of the School Garden Leadership Training Series. We hope you learned a lot and continue to network with us in the Facebook group. Be sure to fill out our survey as well. We have linked in our chat box, I believe, there should be a professional development survey as well as a general survey. And if you want to request CEUs, that's how you will do that. And then once again, we have our Google Drive folder. So please join us next session, which is Tuesday, March 16th, and we'll be talking about hydroponics from beginning to end and splashing around together through that learning journey. Thanks, everyone.